Hello, everyone online. Just checked with the chair. Our target is about 11:20 to get started. So you got about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Blair. Oops.
Hey, Mavis, can you mute your mic?
Sure. You don't want to listen to my Vitamix.
My eardrums are about to be blown out.
Sorry.
Crusade to fire our property.
How's it going?
And it's created a
We
problem.
lost, which I knew we would do.
There's no doubt about it.
But well, we got to change stuff.
Oh, good.
But it also put me, I knew it would hurt me politically. So.
Madam Chair is going to be in.
Have you turned in emissions?
That's your job.
Each of us. is supposed to.
Oh, your job.
I know that. I could, but I decided it wasn't.
Oh, that would be good. Let's do it.
I already did
I'll,
one.
you can have my new job. Appears to be our job to squander this
Yeah.
money
That's right.
because the board won't fund everything else. I'll put that in the mission statement. I'll do that. I'll get Judy to rewrite it. She's good with words.
All right, is everyone ready to get started? Everyone find your seats, grab some popcorn. Let's get this thing going. Let's see what time I got. It is 11:22 a.m. on November 24th, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The Kane County American Rescue Plan Committee. Clerk, please call roll for attendance.
Bates,
Bates here.
Brown,
Brown here.
Bras, Gums,
Comes here.
Kenyon,
Here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Martin,
Martin present.
Molina,
Present.
Strothman,
Strathman here.
Tepe,
Deputy here.
and Sanchez.
Here. Hey, can I have someone ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes of October 27th, November 2nd, and November 10th of 2021?
Comes, I'll ask for unanimous consent to accept the minutes from October 27, 2021, November 2nd, and November 10th, 2021.
Is there any opposition to that consent? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on. Chairman's comments is last meeting ran late, so let's try and keep this one brief. Discussion items, program manager update, Mr. Phillips. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped right over public
Public
comments.
comments?
I didn't mean to do that. It's the first time for everything, right? So we have public comments. I have a couple speakers signed up. Mr. Joe Jackson is the first one on my list. Mr. Jackson, if you could just approach the podium, state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I am Joe Jackson. I'm the executive director at Hesed House in Aurora. And first, thank you actually all for being here today. I was here 2 weeks ago. I know that there's a lot of things on your plate for today, and this isn't the most convenient day to meet, but I appreciate you being here and taking action on this funding. And I thank you on behalf of the roughly 300 guests that we have at Hesed House, who will be enjoying a delicious turkey dinner tomorrow, and the hundreds more in the community that will be supporting on Thanksgiving tomorrow as well. And then just side note, as a parent, thank you for being here so my kids who are off of school can see local government at work. This is awesome. So I'm also here today to call for further action. As you heard 2 weeks ago, shelters in Kane County are nearing capacity, and Hesed House is no exception. We'd actually already be over capacity if we were to accept the 60% reduction that we had earlier last year. But despite the Herculean efforts by people here at this board, the city of Aurora, and a number of other agencies, we got back to pre-COVID capacity, but we are very quickly approaching that. You know the reasons why. I won't go into those again. But it's going to require action on Hesed House's part. And we've taken leaps of faith before. Throughout our existence, 40 years, we've taken plenty of them. We're going to have to take another one now. We need to pivot again and shift our operations around to increase our capacity in any way that we can. This is going to take quite a bit of funding. It's going to take additional staff. It's probably going to take hotels off-site. It's going to take a lot. And so I ask that you keep that in mind as you continue on with this committee and the work that you are doing so diligently, because I cannot allow Hesed House, any of my staff or myself, to ever come to a time where we have to decide what man, women, or children are able to come into Hesed House and get a warm, safe place to sleep at night, and which ones would be turned away due to capacity issues, to then face the bitter and unrelenting winter nights that are honestly here and will just get worse over the coming weeks and months. So again, on behalf of everybody at Hesed House, thank you so much for being here and for your actions today and with this committee. And we look forward to working with you more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Next on my list, Eileen McNamee, Pads of Elgin.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great pre-turkey day. Eileen McNamee, Pads of Elgin. And I won't double up on everything that Joe's saying, but here's the important thing. We are at capacity. Since I last spoke, we've doubled. Thankfully, we've housed people. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to take the extra people in. We have our mandate, IDPH, Kane County Health Department, how much space we need between every guest there to prevent COVID and another outbreak. But we need to probably switch to hotels, and to switch to hotels is not just the funding for the hotels. It takes twice the amount of staff to put people in a hotel, because you need to have people, they can't self-serve all their food. We need to order a bunch of more supplies so we can divvy up all the food, get them into containers, get them shipped back over to the hotel. Then we need someone to pass out all the food. It is an awful lot. Right now, we're down on staff. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of incidents with some employees who will be coming back but needed to take some time off. And you guys know the present employment market. So it's really tough we have great employees. They are wonderful. They are continuing the work no matter the conditions, but the conditions will get worse, as you know. So just making sure that this is not going to be our one-off that we talked about before, and that this is just the first part, this emergency funding, and that as the shelter, as the people who are taking in everyone who are homeless, who were just a couple of paychecks away from being homeless, who were previous taxpayers, that we are there and that we can help them out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McNamee. Is there anyone else present that would like to deliver a public comment? Just state your name and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Name is Mark Avalar. I'm from Algonquin, Illinois, in Kane County. And this is more of an off-agenda public service announcement for the members of the committee, and certainly for the board members on the committee, because the local press has not covered this at all. I just want to let you know that with all the grants and the structure you have set up for the mental health care, we all know it's needed. The litigation between Dundee Township and Kane County had a final ruling on Monday afternoon, and the ruling was in the county's favor, which means it will not be a tax extension for the 708 Mental Health Board. And while I understand and recognize the grant program is for specific agencies, it's more of to let all of you know that we as the local residents in Dundee, and I know Mr. Chair and Mr. Caius are also in Dundee, we know what's going to have to be done to have to go back to referendum and ask for the taxpayers to approve it under the property tax extension limitation law. It's more of a public service to know that we have to sell that. And certainly the work and the cooperation and the grants to all the programs, plus those are not here but have spoken at other public hearings, we know that will complement being able to let the taxpayers know, especially in my hometown where significant more residents have mental health services through McHenry County 708 Mental Health Board, and how to bring the rest of us in Kane County up to that level of service through a township 708 Mental Health Board. I've heard third hand Elgin Township might be going back to referendum as well. Whatever the case is, though, is keep in mind that there's so many complementing efforts for the real challenge of mental health that all of us probably know too well, either directly or indirectly, is still taking place. So thank you for hearing me out, and just hope this information is useful to you.
Thank you, Mr. Avalar. Anyone else that would like to deliver a public comment at this time? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on. Okay, discussion items. First up, we have program manager update with Mr. Peter Phillips.
Good afternoon. Peter Phillips, Program Manager, American Rescue Plan. My update is essentially to inform you of activities that have taken place since last week when our consultant came on. The contract was signed on 11/15, and first thing 11/16, we began our Zoom meetings that were offsite because they had a number of people throughout the country that are on our team as experts, but we performed our kickoff, which resulted in our partner and senior manager being on campus this Monday and Tuesday. And we initiated meetings with finance department, separately with state's attorney, and then with Roger and IT. And the result of those meetings is developing, but initially we focused specifically on the support and how we are going to expedite the community support grant that is going to be discussed today. And then also to some of the understanding how we are going to work with the staffing that you are going to talk about for the finance and state's attorney. We are presently working toward developing our roadmap, which will be clearly defined upon consensus and discussions regarding the application of funds that the board will be discussing. And we will culminate with a detailed presentation and objectively a roadmap. And then also we're developing a tool to develop a survey of sorts that will hopefully collect data points that will be our source for consensus on the use of funds, which obviously there were details that came up in the last meeting that are points of discussion that are all going to be concentrated on by Ernst & Young and my office. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, no questions online for Mr. Phillips. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Okay, next mission statement. So I did receive a few submissions and try to take some of the verbiage and distill things. And I did create somewhat of a generic draft that we can start with. So I wanted to get some feedback from you guys since we're all going to be together. Let me share my screen here. And so this is just the draft. There you go. Mission of the Kane County American Rescue Plan committees to distribute funds in a thoughtful and professional manner in order to address the needs of the county and its residents, to reduce the health impacts of COVID-19, bolster economic recovery, and ensure that government services aren't disrupted. So again, it's somewhat of a generic, broad description, and I would love for some feedback from you all. If you have any, if you'd like to make any changes, additions, deletions at this point, and then I can take it back to the drawing board and bring you a more polished version next time. Mr. Martin.
I'd like to accept it as is.
Thank you. Anyone else have any changes they would like to make to this mission statement? Mr. Kenyon?
I'm with John Mark.
Okay, I thought you were going to add something about farming in there, but you didn't. Okay, good. Which I would be okay with. Okay, well, if you guys like this, then this is what we can adopt as our mission statement for this committee that will help, inform and guide the philosophy of our actions and move us toward making the best use of this money for all of our residents. So we'll just leave that out there for now. If anybody wants to give some comments or changes later, let me know. And then Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, would you want to ask for consensus on this then?
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
sure. Do we have consensus to adopt this as the mission statement?
I move for unanimous consent to adopt the mission statement
Any
as
opposition?
presented.
Froz isn't here, but I think he was okay with what we've got. So, all right. And that is the mission statement for the American Rescue Plan Committee. Next discussion item, I didn't make it on here. It came up after we submitted the agenda. It was brought to my attention that the contact tracing contract that we have with the health department and KPMG, it is nearing its end on December 31st. And so once I was alerted of that, I said, all right, let's get a resolution put together and try and get this passed before the end of that contract. Didn't make it onto this agenda. And so in talking with the state's attorney, they suggested that the contact tracing contract be moved to the executive committee and potentially also the ARP committee, which will be meeting right after executive. And I did mention, some might say, why would we go in that order? Maybe just go to executive only and then county board. So I wanted to bring it up with you guys here today and get your feedback on what you would like to do. Send it to executive and then the American Rescue Plan Committee directly after, then to the county board, or just executive and county board. Mr. Martin.
With me, it would make a difference. What exactly are we doing with the?
It's a renewal of the contact tracing program, the contract we have with
For what
KPMG.
period and for what period of time?
I believe it's for 1 year. And I don't know if we have anyone from the health department. I think the number we were looking at was 2.9 million for 1 year. Contact tracing is something we're mandated to do, so it's one of those. But we're trying to get this in by the end of the year, if at all
That's
possible.
coming out of the 4 million or another bucket.
This would come out of the main ARP fund. Mhm. Mr. Brown.
Sure. Yeah, that was one of the applications that Ms. Molina and I both reviewed with the health department. And for clarification, it is for 1 year,
Yeah.
2.9 million,
Okay.
2 point what?
2.9 million.
Mhm. So do we have consensus to, well, what do you guys want to do? Move it to exec and then county board, or exec and ARP? That was just a suggestion from the state's attorney's office, so that's why I'm offering it to you today. Ms. Molina?
I guess I would ask our chairwoman if it's okay if it goes to exec, and then from exec, if we can move it on to the full county board in December. Because as we know, the contact tracing services are extremely important and are going to be needed into next year. And we want to make sure that the current employees are aware that we will be continuing needing their services into next year. So I guess it's more of a parliamentary question. If this goes to executive, the majority of us on this board are on executive already. If it's okay with Madam Chairwoman, that we move from executive to the full board.
I think we can go straight to exec and then to the full board.
Okay.
This is a mandated service, so we have no choice.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Under new business, we have 2 resolutions. I would ask for a motion and a second to discuss and potentially pass establishing parameters for the community support grant program. Anybody? Mr. Martin moves.
Leonard seconds.
Leonard seconds. Okay, so what we have to discuss on this one today, obviously, is the minimum requirement for our grants. And let me pull up quickly here. Mr. Phillips supplied us all with some information based on a conversation meeting that we had with Ernst & Young that gave us a good baseline of how much it will cost to process each application. Now, this is just the processing of an application. Some applicants will have costs that they will be reimbursed for going forward on an ongoing basis, whether it be a monthly invoice or a quarterly or biannual. And that will increase the administrative cost. But when we spoke with Ernst & Young, the amount of that increase is very minimal. So the number we're looking at here is talking about hours. And that's hours to process the actual application, make sure all the paperwork is in order. Any of the applicants that we get that have ongoing reimbursements, the cost to, approve those from Ernst & Young is very minimal. We're talking minutes compared to hours. So just a base number for processing applications, you can see here, it's about $800 each. And you have the breakdown there. So that is a good starting point. And I did want to ask Mr. Phillips, and you don't have to come to the podium, you have a microphone there. You did put at the bottom that the cost of grant review should not exceed 5% of the requested grant amount, which would be about $16,000. And I wanted to ask you where that number came from. I don't recall that in our meeting with Ernst & Young. We didn't get a chance to talk about that yesterday.
Well, when we spoke to Ernst & Young, they theorized 10%. My experience as a professional and looking at this as a cost from a corporate sense, this is a cost of sales. And I would be more conservative by establishing what percentage of our costs are, knowing that there are likely in certain scenarios going to be much more content to be reviewed. So lack of having experience in the applications thus far, that figure is something that I have worked with in the past. That is a conservative amount to control the administrative cost.
Okay. So yeah, it's a good conservative amount. Yeah, because 10% is what I remember we talked about. That's why I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. So
I lowered that for conversation's sake, assuming that 10% may be an area we go to.
Okay, so that is the base figure, the baseline figure we have for processing our applicants. And then we'll go to this other. We have our allocation table that is in our resolution. So I added another column for the purposes of our discussion today so that we can determine where we want things. You'll notice I did put $8,000 down here as a minimum for food pantries because they're smaller organizations. I wanted to just start there. If you guys want to raise it, that's fine. That represents a 10% of the total cost for administrative services. So
Mr.
let's
Chair?
hold on, Ms. Bates, hold on.
Okay.
Let's go through these one by one. So for the behavioral and mental health 2 category, would anybody like to make a motion or a suggestion, a motion to amend that we either keep 16 or that we change from $16,000? I'm sorry, I'm fumbling my words. Mr. Martin.
I have a question. And everyone's cognizant of the fact that I just had a birthday, so I may have forgotten. I thought we had discussed the concept of a $20,000 threshold. Is that?
Mr. Chair,
that was one of the ideas.
Here. Mr. Chair, I'm on stack, please. I was
What's that,
next.
Ms.
I was
Bates?
next.
Okay, hold on. $20,000 was one of the ideas that was discussed. 10% of the total was another idea that was discussed. So that was just kind of our starting point.
All right. I just wanted to know if we had.
Okay. Ms. Bates, your question?
Thank you. I have something I think is very relevant to this conversation. I believe that a good solution to this minimum amount per application, we could possibly make it a lower amount, but we would say that the average of the processing fees should be less than 5 to 10%, which means on some very large grants, the processing fee might be less than 1% of the grant. And on a very small amount, say $10,000, the processing fee would be more like 7%. So if I'd like to use an average for this processing fee rather than a flat rate, so that we can be more flexible in the amount of our minimum per application, maybe go down to 10,000.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bates. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Leonard speaking. Respectfully, I don't agree with the idea of an average amount because it can be skewed so drastically. If you have a very large grant and a very small grant, you could have a $2,000 to $3,000 grant that would, if the costs were $800, would be, you know, a substantial portion of that grant. And averaging those with large amounts, I don't think works. I like the idea of a minimum amount. I would suggest 20,000, but that's just my suggestion. And it's the pleasure of the committee to decide what they want to do.
Madam Chair.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Just to clarify, please, this is actually to review, this is the cost to review the initial application. This is not the cost to manage the application. So whether it's 16,000, 8,000, 20,000, that's money first in, not the life of the grant. So we're adding additional costs to that. And $16,000 per application, oh my goodness. That is a significant amount of money and it gives me great pause. I thought that there could possibly be a way to reduce that. As you talk about the parameters for these community grants, either carefully restrict what you're going to be looking for funding. So you restrict the amount of grants that are coming in, or the committee vets these grants, gives the first vetting of the grant, selects which grants you find to be the most attractive or meaningful for the communities, narrows down that pool, which will narrow down the ultimate administrative costs, to have them Ernst & Young vetted to make sure that it's compliance with the guidelines set forth through the federal government.
Madam Chair, the $16,000 isn't the processing fee. It's the grant amount.
No,
right?
No, it's for Ernst & Young to review
No.
it.
16,000 is the minimum amount for the grant award.
That's the grant award.
The initial fee for review from Ernst & Young is $800 per application. And then for the applicants that have ongoing invoices to send in, there will be additional administrative costs to that as well.
Well, I just jumped ahead of the conversation, but nonetheless, $800 is.
It's still a good idea to vet it through the committee, I believe.
Just if you're looking at 16,000 divided by 1 million, how many grant applications are we looking at?
A lot.
Times 800?
Well, that's just for $1 million.
Well, like the math I did yesterday.
67.
If we were to get 40 submissions to that category, and with all the other categories combined, it would have been 40,000 to process those applications.
That seems to me a grant in itself. $40,000 for the food pantry. $40,000 for mental health, homeless.
Mr. Shepro.
Just a question. Is there, I thought that statutorily there's a cap on the administrative expenses. So I would think that, and is that overall? Is otherwise you can't say, average, I mean, on average, everything works out, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be out of whack. I think that was Mr. Leonard's point, is that depending on what you're looking at, that could be wildly off if you're just doing it by average. But I guess I thought that there were regulations that kind of place some limits on that.
I'm not aware of that, and we don't have anyone from the state's attorney here today to ask. Mr. Martin, I saw your hand first, and then Ms. Molina.
Yeah, I guess this is more of a statement than a question, but if we had any degree of sanity in the administration of the CARES Act, it's that we established a first come, first served basis in applications, and we put in rigid requirements. And if they met the requirements, they got it. And if they didn't meet them, they didn't get it. And if they applied after the money was gone, they weren't in the group. I think we put ourselves in a horrendously difficult, arbitrary environment to suggest that we're going to vet individual applications when they come in. I think we'll go crazy. And we won't do a good job. I'll guarantee you, we won't do a good job if we have to vet each one. I think we need standards. I think if they come in and they meet the standard, they get it. And if they don't, they don't. And I like the $20,000. I just think it's a significant enough sum of money. It means the review is gonna cost then a little bit less than 10%. But if we've got administrative costs in here and we give somebody $2,000, then the answer is we've netted nothing to the community. I mean, I was in favor of larger numbers in the first place. So I'm arguing from the same position I had, but I don't want to have the fixed administrative costs exhaust what we have available to distribute. And
Mr. Chair?
Hold on, Ms.
well,
Nates.
I'm suggesting in my mind, 20,000 is a compromise. I could see more and be happy with it, but I do not want to have to sit as a committee and suggest that we're gonna vet these. It is impossible to do that.
Ms. Molina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess first of all, some clarification. I was under the assumption that the ARP money provided a certain percentage for administrative costs to provide this money. So my assumption is the administrative cost to review these grants will be coming from that 10% that was allocated specifically for administration costs.
That's correct.
correct?
And
Okay.
more specifically, the $1 million, up to $1 million we approved for Ernst & Young.
So that's separate from the money that we're looking at for this grant program. My second question would be, we've created the first mental health #1, and we've allocated $2 million towards that.
Mhm.
Have we already guaranteed each of those 6 organizations $330,000? Because I don't remember voting on that. And if we have, do those applications have to go through Ernst & Young to review? Or did we already blanket that amount of money to each of those 6 organizations?
Well, to answer your first question, we haven't. The county board has to approve this resolution in its final form before anything can be done. This was the conceptual idea that we discussed last time, creating these 2 different categories. So once there is that approval, they will still go through a portal and be vetted by Ernst & Young. To answer your second question, they will, every penny that we spend from this money has to be looked at.
So I guess my final thing at this point would be, I was hoping that Ernst & Young would give us some sort of guidance as to what would qualify for these type of allocations first, before we say how much money we're giving each organization. Because I would hate to we know Hesed House and we know PADS, they need money. And for us to just give a blanket amount right now, but not know how much of the ARP money could actually go towards these organizations. I just feel like we're putting the cart before the horse again. So my understanding that when we got Ernst & Young on board, they were going to provide us some more guidance as to what we're going to be requesting from these organizations. So I guess that's just my statement.
Well, in the short time we've had with Ernst & Young on board, amongst all the conversations of, getting their systems matching ours, we asked what their opinions were on this minimum amount concept. And with the timeline that we have, they weren't able to do a full 100% researched deep dive into, what that could look like, and, to be more specific and detailed. So we talked to them about, well, what could you recommend and what information could you provide for us in that timeline that we have? And so that's where we discussed the concept of a baseline amount for each application, and then got a better understanding of the process that they'll be going through to vet these applicants, as well as the ongoing costs of, taking in invoices for ongoing reimbursements. So it's really a matter of time crunch that we didn't have them do a more detailed look into it, because that would set us back at least another month.
I understand. They've been on board for basically 7 days. So
Yeah.
I understand that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brown?
I excuse me for this, but I have a tendency sometimes when conversations are going on to try to read the faces of the people that are in the room. And I've noticed our program manager over there has been trying to interject into some of this, so maybe he's got some information that should be shared.
I didn't see your hand if it was up, sorry. Go ahead. Peter, if
Certainly.
you got something.
Peter Phillips. It should be stated, first of all, that the concept and the $800 figure came about in conversations with Ernst & Young's experience with the Illinois Department of Family and Health and Services, which they have worked at with CARES Act, and they're working with ARP. Now, their applications are not going to be in some regard as content driven as some of ours will be, and some of ours will be less content driven, depending on the size of the organization. Now, I would say that the administrative costs that we can tell now that we understand would be the initial vetting of an application. However, to qualify that, our work this next week in solidifying, and Roger and Davis have taken the ball and we're coordinating this activity for next week and assessing and finalizing the portal, which we are going to build in some pre-screening that is going to be vetting, that is going to control the people that come into the application process. We are not going to create a situation where we are spending dollars and times vetting requests that aren't appropriate to begin with, that we are able to filter at the beginning before it gets to Ernst & Young. And the concept is that we will be using the strict Treasury guidance up front in the portal to allow entry into the application process, so that we're trying to, from the get-go, filter down to good data to begin with, and then provide you fewer data points to make your decisions. And ultimately, with Ernst & Young validating your decisions based on the legal criteria and guidelines.
But some applications won't make it all the way through the process.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair.
And to follow that and to follow Mr. Martin's comments, when you were doing the CARES Act, if somebody would apply for an opportunity to receive funds, and you just took the main pool of money and drew it down if they were qualified. So we would give them, would you give them the full amount? Is that going to be the case here? What if you have in behavior and mental health too, a number of applications, and they're all worthy, they've all been vetted, they're all great organizations with worthy projects, but you don't have enough money. Are you going to then draw that money down to fund each one of them with a lesser amount? Or are you going to do as Mr. Martin suggests, first one, first in, and if the fifth one up doesn't have enough money, then they just don't get funded?
Mr. Chairman?
I can answer at least the conversations we've had and with Ernst & Young is that we would undergo a similar type of process to the Riverboat Committee. So we would accept all applications and have not a vetting, but let's look at everything and have a way for everyone to kind of make some reductions to allocations to the award amounts.
So that all would be accommodated.
Mhm.
And then what, excuse me, let me just follow up on that. So that if an organization needs $100,000 to do its program, but there's only $75,000 available to them, will you go back to that organization and say, how are you going to make up the arrears? Because if they said we don't have the $25,000 to make up the arrears, then that program is not going to be operable for that organization.
You mean if it's an all or nothing type of application that they're requesting? Yeah.
Just hypothetical.
Yeah. And I think that's something we can get into with the pre-screening to know if an application is all or nothing. Like we said, 100,000, you gave us 75, that's not going to work for us. Well, that's good for us to know, because if we only have 75, then we would have to reject the
Mr.
application.
Chairman.
Mr. Shepro.
I guess maybe to refresh the chair's recollection, I think it depended on CARES Act, what category it was. For example, the fire districts, a certain amount was allocated. I believe that amount was oversubscribed by requests. And the committee and the board ultimately did a kind of a pro rata reduction for those requests. However, I believe that these small business grants were first come, first serve, and they got what they asked for until the money ran out, and then that was it. And I think there were yet some other distinctions made for some of the other categories. Is that?
That is what we did.
Yeah. So it wasn't the same process for everybody who applied.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. Number one, how many grant requests do we have in on this program? And is there a deadline for them applying?
We haven't opened the portal, so we don't have any
So
applications.
we have
yet.
no idea where that's going to be. Will we have a deadline once we open the portal?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It won't be open-ended. Okay. Mr. Martin made the suggestion of $20,000 for the minimum application amount for behavioral mental health 2. Do we have any objections to that? I think last time I had everyone just vote. It was an informal vote, obviously, but maybe we should just do that again.
Mr.
For
Chair?
this discussion. Ms. Bates?
I was hoping it would be 10,000, so could we compromise at maybe 15,000? Especially in Aurora, in my district, we have some very good, but very small nonprofits that I think could make tremendously good use of $10,000 or $15,000. So I'd like to make it smaller than 20.
Point well taken, Ms. Bates. Mr. Martin made the motion for 20. So we're going to start there.
Is it a motion or a suggestion?
Well, it's an informal motion that's helping us come up with the final amendment to this resolution.
All right.
Let's do a formal motion.
Well,
And vote on it.
well, okay, so the process I was thinking is we would do it informally as we did last time, and then turn that into one amendment that gets moved, seconded, and passed for this resolution.
We can always amend the resolution too, so.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So it's either we just pass amendments for each one of these, or we do it all at once. So if you guys would like to do it more formally, Mr. Martin, was that an official motion for an amendment to the resolution then?
Yes.
Let me, and nobody's seconded it yet, so it's still up in the air, right?
Leonard second.
Well, I would like to request, having put the ball in motion, that maybe I want to have teeter it a little bit as it rolls. Myrna has made a valid point, I think, about having an idea. Is if this is the appropriate time to do this, or if we need more guidance before we do it. And maybe more appropriate to the conversation would be for, if Bill will withdraw the second, I'll withdraw
Sure.
the motion, if we could kind of entertain a conversation on her point. I think we need to put that issue to rest in our mind before we move ahead, unless nobody but Myrna thinks it's an issue. I think we ought to know that we're either comfortable or not that we have a basis for making the decision, I guess is.
Is that another way of saying we would want Ernst & Young to really dive deep into what we're looking for with this program, and then come back to us with a more,
I mean, my
fleshed out
perspective is I
recommendation?
want the money that we disperse to go to the biggest benefit possible. And I am assuming one of the reasons that we've engaged Ernst & Young is to rely upon their experience to tell us what they would recommend in doing it, in dollar amounts or whatever else. And I don't know what a deep dive is, you know what I mean? I can't, in my mind, I picture two guys having two people at Ernst & Young having a conversation, say, what did we do last time? And tell us if it worked or not. I have trouble thinking that this is going to be a long investigative process, but we have limited funds. Peter, am I off base on that?
No, you're not. But one of the tools that Ernst & Young is developing, which we determined this week in meetings, is, I hesitate to give all the details on this, but we are developing a digital survey of sorts that we find that it is imperative that we push to the committee members. And the survey, we have to get to a final conclusion of what the county's objective is for the use of the monies. In other words, to devise our buckets, which the mission statement is the first step on creating that path. But once we have these data points, you have information available to you where you can make these critical assessments. And the $800 is not in a vacuum, but is based on information we have right now. Once we understand the complexity and how detailed our application process is going to be, that tool is going to, yes, provide some pre-vetting, at least some pre-screening to narrow down and filter what the exposure of the administrative expenses is going to be, but also to Mr. Martin's point, in some of these larger areas that we can, to follow Michael Isaacson's model that he set up with these 6 entities, and then sub-recipients to those, is a model I think that is going to help us severely reduce the amount of exposure that we have to unknown administrative costs down the line. But some of the upfront assessment is going to be these bigger grants. What is it going to cost to administer them? And if we can identify that upfront, that administrative cost should be a partnership. And Madam Chair has identified that we should be thinking of partnerships, but we need to help these grant recipients, I think, understand that some of this administrative cost has to be considered in the ultimate amount that they are granted.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shepro?
I think I'm getting confused. First, I spent a fair amount of time reading the contract, and my sense is that Ernst & Young is not purporting to give us judgments about whose grant is more worthy. They're going to look at it for legality. So I think if we're looking to them to say, you know, this is a better idea than that, I don't think they're going to do that. But also, I sense that Madam Chair's point and Melina's point was not about the administrative costs. It was about the idea that if we have too low, and Mr. Leonard too, if you have too low a threshold, you're going to, well, I won't use that word, but you're going to dribble the money away in small grants that could be offset or eaten up by administrative costs. And and if the question is, are you going to decide that now? I think maybe Mr. Martin is on to something that might be too early to do that. But the idea that you're going to take this and pass them out in $10,000 increments just strikes me as, one, it's going to increase your workload enormously, and it's going to inevitably increase the overhead cost of just the basic review. But it seemed to me those are two different issues.
Just another piece of information to throw into. This money goes back to March 3rd of 2021. So some of the applicants are going to have their entire grant amount, the award, claimable, reimbursable immediately, which means no further administrative costs for that applicant. So just another point of information.
Mr. Chair?
That's only if this committee allows that as part of its criteria.
It's not restricted.
Well,
So otherwise,
but-
it's just allowable under the ARPA, and generally we can be more specific in the
You
language.
can
of the
be more
resolution.
specific if this committee chooses not to use that option.
But otherwise, it's just a given of the American Rescue Plan.
Bates, please.
Ms. Bates?
As this discussion goes on and on, I feel my inexperience on this board more and more. but I'm going to venture one more suggestion. Most of my suggestions, you guys have better ones, but I want to say that maybe we should wait and see about the minimum. Okay, if this is a terrible idea, that's okay. I'm sure you'll tell me why. But if we don't put a minimum on there, we could see what we get. Maybe we won't get the $5,000 and $10,000 ones. Maybe we'll only get $50,000 requests, and then we'll know. We'll let the community guide us in what our minimum should be, and wait and see what comes in.
Ms. Molina?
Yeah, that's always kind of been my fear, is that we're assuming a lot of things and our service agents need this money now. And we're making assumptions as to what they need. They're going to be the ones to tell us what they need, and we should hear them out. So creating a minimum or a maximum, or even creating categories for allocations at this point, I think I just want to know what the community needs and how much they need. And then we can vet how much we can actually give. But without the guidance and without knowing really what our community needs, I feel like we're making all these assumptions. So I guess my train of thought would be, let's just create the portal with the guidance, remove these categories, and just see what we need. And then once we have all these grants applications in that meet some criteria, then we can create categories of how much gets allocated to what category.
When you talk about community needs and obtaining those needs, what do you envision?
I envision PADS entering their application into the portal saying, this is what we need based on our last year of, what we need from the county because of the COVID, or because of, what we need to recover. And based on the criteria that we already have from the ARP committee and what Peter's going to be putting together, it'll determine whether or not they meet some of those needs. Whether or not we are able to provide some of those needs. Same with the food pantry, same with our behavioral and mental health services. I want to hear what they think they need from us first before we put them into categories. That would be my suggestion at this point. I think we need to hear from them, and I think we know that they need this money now. Yeah. And the longer we take to hear what they exactly need, it's just prolonging everything. So
are you saying that we should listen to what they say, but we don't have time to?
No, I'm saying that we should create the portal with the criteria that the ARP already has, that Peter's already on track for, and open it up and see what happens.
And not put in a minimum?
And not put in a minimum and not put in a maximum.
Let the community tell us what they need.
And then once we vet those as a committee, we can then turn it over to Ernst & Young. But I don't know what our community needs right now, and I don't want to put them into categories. I don't know if our homeless shelters only need $750,000. From what I hear, I think they need a lot more than that in the next year. So I'd like to hear what they have to say first in this portal.
Mr. Leonard?
Yes, two questions. Number one, when are we going to open up the portal, the specific date? And number two, why haven't we opened it up already?
Well, we just got Ernst & Young on last week. We need them to help us, and they've been working to get going on finalizing the language, the legalese, making sure we're asking the right kinds of questions, pre-screening, but they are actually waiting for us to come to some determinations on this resolution, final action, so that they can put in the final information based on.
Why do they have to put in a minimum amount or whatever? They really don't. I guess my concern is we've got to start getting some timelines. We have a meeting, we go, well, we'll discuss again the next meeting, then we go on and on. We need a timeline. So with Ernst & Young, what I would respectfully suggest is that you contact them and say, when can you put together an application process so that we can open the portal and find out what the community needs? Because I agree with Ms. Molina and Ms. Bates that, we can't decide what they need. We need to find out what they believe they need, and then we can decide what we can do for them. But I think we need to open that portal. And I think if Ernst & Young is the thing holding us up right now, I know they've only been on board for 2 weeks, but let's give them a timeline, like December 1st or something.
Mr. Phillips, correct me if I'm wrong, and you might have some more to add to this. Are they waiting for us for this resolution to be finalized and approved before they can finish?
No, they are not.
Okay.
We are working on dual paths. The opening of the portal is based on, and this relates back to the last meeting, is that we have some constraints that are new based on the insurance for the cyber security. Part of the portal application and part of our integration with Ernst & Young into our systems. I work on a VPN when I'm outside of the building. I have authorization because I'm an employee. Those authorizations do not extend to contract people and contracted organizations. So there's some high-level systematic programming that needs to be done that Roger and Charles are actively working on. That is being done over the next couple of days. It's going to result in a meeting with Ernst & Young by which we establish on the portal the screening criteria that is going to help us manage the flow of information that is going to provide you the exact data that Ms. Molina is requesting and needs. The fact that Ernst & Young doesn't have that available is that I have been working and I've been familiarizing myself with the systems and the personnel that have been living through the CARES Act, and we do not want to duplicate that. We have a different timeline. Of course, we know the timelines is set forth by the Treasury Department. We're working back from those timelines. So the short answer is we anticipate the portal being available by December 8th. Based on these meetings that we must have with IT to set the parameters for security for the transfer of information to and from Ernst & Young to the county. And that involves a cloud-based repository. And it is all tied to some of these security tokens that have been going up. So there are multiple inter-county dependencies that we are reliant upon understanding as well, that some of the finance committee has moving gears that we must integrate into that. We cannot work in a vacuum to do this because we're also working toward the date of 2026, when ultimately we have to close the program down.
Mr. Martin?
I'd like to clarify my original comment and I guess go at odds with Mavis, Bill, and Myrna. To me, it's not fair to the potential applicants to say, fill in your application and send it to us without having some financial parameters, because if pick a charity, pick pads, pick anybody. I'm going to tell you their needs are going to exceed what we have the ability to provide. And if we just say ask for it and they don't have a parameter in determining it, how do they know that they're framing the application in a realistic sense?
And they're gonna have to hire somebody to prepare it.
Well, and so I think even though it might be a little presumptive on our part, I think we do need to provide standards so that when they make the application, they're responding to reality. And all that I want Ernst & Young to do, okay, is to just sit and say, we've administered this kind of stuff before, and we think if you establish a dollar amount of 5,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is that they represent, that's the sweet spot. That's what you ought to do. And then we ought to arbitrarily put that number in, put our portal together and have them make the application. But I can't imagine the difficulty of being a charity. I mean, you know what life is like. We're going to ask for everything we can get and should, but they're not going to get it. They're not going to get everything they ask for. And I think that if we can establish a reasonable dollar amount, then let them come forward with a program that they can envision without, to Ken's point, hiring a consultant to determine what they're gonna do. You know, if it's 50,000 minimum or if it's 100 or, you know, whatever the number is, let's give them some help and say, this is what we're gonna do. Now, if we get all of this is done and we've got the applications and we've got money left over, you know, hot dog, but I don't think we're gonna have money left over by any stretch of the imagination. And I just find it burdensome without benefit to us to tell the charities to just ask away and we'll decide what we're gonna do. We will prioritize, which is almost worse than throwing a dart at a board. If you get 6 people and ultimately 24 to arrive in opinion and how we ought to prioritize.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Shepro.
We've been using the word what the community needs, but I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think maybe what some of the people are saying, just as an example, we've heard from today, just, you know, from 2 agencies, which obviously have a track record, and they know what they need. I mean, whether we agree or not, of course, is up to the committee, but they have a specific need as opposed to Ken Shepro that has a great idea. If you'd give me $20,000, and that's maybe more of a want or an idea. And this committee may well decide when you've got 2 people wanting $20,000, who needs it as opposed to who wants it. And there again, I would just imagine, as we heard this with the CARES Act, a lot of the smaller applicants didn't know how to do it, and they had to hire somebody, and many people, oh, I'm not going to apply for a $5,000 grant because it's going to cost me $3,000 to get it done. I mean, I know some of the smaller fire districts, and they didn't apply because of that. So I think we've got to, again, look at that. And I sense that we've been kind of going around in a circle here. You know, I do agree that I think in fairness to the applicants, you have to have some parameter for their sake. You don't want people to have to spend time on an application only to be told, yeah, we've got too many applications and, you know, 1,000 people applied for $500 grants.
Thank you, Mr. Shepro. Madam Chair, did you have a comment?
I feel like Mr. Brown right now, looking at everybody's faces. The word the portal, since I'm not tech savvy, but I'm not a techie, a portal simply means an entryway, a door that opens. And we use this term portal as the entryway. And then once you get onto it, with all the protections that have to be put in because of working within the system of the county. I'm going to get back to nuts and bolts. What does the application look like? The actual application, does it have a budget report? Does it have a listing of board members? Does it have a listing of their annual gifts every year? What is their program that they're looking for? What are the expenses? Is the program going to last 6 months? Is it going to last a year? Is it going to be for payroll? Are we going to restrict it to payroll? Or are we going to be restricting it to capital improvements, perhaps a food truck for our food pantries? What does this look like? And I'm not hearing any of that conversation and that criteria. To Mr. Shepro's point, I believe this is something that this committee should be defining on what the need is. People have asked me, well, what are other counties doing? Now, I'm not going to be using Cook County because it's Cook County, or the city of Chicago has received this money, but they've sent out money for rent relief. They've been very specific and very targeted of what they're doing. You had, Chairman, a public forum here and for not-for-profits to come in. And we continually heard from them that they would need some support for their payroll to get new staff. And that is something that I've heard you speak about as well. Is that something that if we're hearing from the community, from the not-for-profits, do we want to go in that direction? But right now, I'm process-oriented, and I think it's really critically important that, at least from my head, that there's clarity about what this application that's going to be housed inside of the portal looks like.
Yeah, I can address that. To the points of eligibility criteria, we did go over that extensively at the last meeting. So that is in the current resolution, all of the criteria that we came up with together, the parameters of the program. As far as the documentation, though, that will be required, that's on Ernst & Young to develop. And as Peter mentioned, they're in the process of getting linked into our system so that they can start working directly on that. So all the required documentation is, that's not for us to decide. That's for the pros to.
Oh, but
to
that's
figure
the
out.
devil's in the details, though.
Could you bring up that resolution so the committee can review that of what the criteria is going to be, please?
You got it, Blair? Otherwise, I got it. I'll pull it up. No, the Exhibit A. So you can see, Madam Chair, the applicant eligibility. That's the criteria we established for entry. For anyone to apply, they have to meet these criteria. And then the grant terms, if you go down, Blair, just a little bit. A little bit further. Lead to the next. There you go. Eligible and ineligible expenses. Those are the items that we went through one by one the last time we discussed this resolution and determined what we wanted for this program.
Could you bring down the following page, not the processing? No, go back up. There you go. Back up one more. Go back down now, Blair. There you go, right there.
Again, these were discussed at the last meeting. Ms. Molina?
Yeah, I guess as a matter of compromise, and I want to move forward with this grant program. I'm fully in support of it. I guess I would look at approving it and asking, do we need a minimum amount for the grant request? Would a minimum amount really make a difference if we added it to the grant program, or leaving it as is? Because the minimum amount was something that was added afterwards, correct? The resolution as read doesn't include a minimum amount.
That is
to
correct. And the
request.
committee last meeting determined that they would like to have some information to create a minimum amount.
Okay. So if we do want a minimum amount, can we agree on it being 15,000 and then move forward?
Well, that kind of brings us back to where we were when Mr. Martin
Right.
made the suggestion of 20,000.
So I mean, I want to continue this process. I want to continue moving forward. I want our service agents to know that we're working on it. And we want them to be prepared with an application, obviously, and give them guidance. I agree with what Mr. Shepro said. So in the art of compromise, I mean, I'm not comfortable with the categories, but because I know that this is needed, I'll go ahead and agree with the categories that were already included with the allocation amounts. And I guess I'm open to including a minimum if that's what we really want to do as a committee at this point, just to provide some kind of guidance to our staff.
Is Ernst,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shepro?
has Ernst & Young been asked about what their experience has been with minimums or not?
They said nothing.
Well, that's sort of what I thought, but I wondered.
Yeah, we discussed a base rate
Yeah.
concept to help us establish this parameter. Ms.
I don't
Strathman?
have a good feel, but again, you're back to the question of the applicant's cost, time and money to process, and our cost to time and money to process. And there comes a point, and I don't purport to know what it is, but the lower it is, the more likely the grant is going to get eaten up substantively and qualitatively with the review time process and so forth. I mean, it's not, I think, going to be a linear cost. Some applications are going to take a certain amount to review and evaluate, and then they're going to come back here. And if it's too low, you're just going to be spending a lot of time on what's going to be very little net to the person you want to help.
Mr. Ethman?
Yeah, I just need a point of clarification. When we took this $4 million that we decided, does this preclude them coming back again and asking for any additional monies? Is this their only shot at money in the bucket?
No, this is a program, and whoever applies. If we create another program in the future that puts money out into the community, then at that time, we can determine if we want to give it to somebody who already got it from us before or not.
Okay, then I think
Here,
that-
you're going to award all this $4 million.
Yes.
yeah, and my understanding was we did that up front because of the community needs.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Yes, the idea was a short-term release of money while we
Right.
go through our planning process.
So I feel like doing some of these numbers, we're making it sound like it's a one-time only ask. And instead of meeting the emergency needs of these community services. Does that make sense? That's what I'm feeling like we're getting lost in the numbers here rather than thinking about the original purpose of this, which was to meet the immediate needs of these services, to do this upfront before we dealt with the rest of the money.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
We just approved $2.9 million that is going to go to the executive committee out of the ARP funding for contact tracing. And after we did the projections, Mr. Onzik, for all potential payables back to the county, I thought there would be $17 million that would be remaining for all other programs that could be funded. Now we've just reduced that amount by $2.9 million for contact tracing, if that's all in, if all things remain the same with the projected amount out of the 103 to balance county budget. So now we're looking at potential of about approximately, give or take, $14 million that we have discretionary money at this juncture. That is truly discretionary.
Ms. Molina?
Yeah, I'd want to just stick to right now to the 4 million that was already allocated for the community grant programs. This is money that will be going out hopefully next year, because the way it looks, it's not going to go out before the end of this year. But I'd like to stick to that amount of money now, because we really don't know what our internal grant programs look like. The majority of us are still undergoing that review process. And most of those grants did 3-year requests. So I'd like to just stick to the topic on hand. And I guess right now, I'd like to move on. So if we're going to stick to this and we're going to continue on with this resolution, I guess I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the resolution as stated with the community grant program. And I guess I'll request the minimum amount allocation be 15,000 for the grants.
I'll second that.
8 second.
Okay, we have a motion to amend, and would that be for all 3 of those categories, behavioral, mental health, 2 homeless shelters and food pantries? Or did it apply
Yes,
to all
could you
3?
bring up your other slide where you had the red? I think you had said 16,000 on one and the other ones were like 8,000.
Yeah.
Bottom one was 8, the other ones were 16.
Yeah.
Top one didn't have one.
Yeah, the top one didn't have one. I would just compromise and say 15,000 on the 3 other categories.
So 15,000 for all three.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to amend the resolution to include a minimum amount of $15,000 for behavioral and mental health category 2, homeless shelters and food pantries. Any discussion on that amendment? Okay, hearing and seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
It's yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Bras, Gums,
Gums, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
Tepi,
Tepe, yes.
and Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Now, there was a point raised by Madam Chair, and I think it was a good point to make it more specific in the language of the resolution that it's retroactive to March 3rd of 2021 for eligible expenses. I would ask if someone would make a motion to amend.
That in there?
It's in there.
There's
In
a
there?
criterion already that.
Is it that it goes back?
Mhm.
Okay, when I looked at it the other
That's
day, I
included.
must have read it too quickly. Okay, well then, it's there.
It's in there. It's the first,
Third,
the first paragraph
2021.
under eligible and ineligible
Yeah,
expenses,
It's assumed in the
Yeah.
ARPA, but,
provided they were incurred by March 3rd, 2021,
okay.
and
So-
not reimbursed by any other source of financial assistance.
So the amendment was approved, so we still have the vote on the resolution in total as it has been amended. Do we have any discussion?
We had a resolution there per this.
Hmm?
We don't have to amend it, do we?
Yeah, we have to amend the resolution to include this minimum.
Well,
That's what we
this-
just did.
The motion that was made and passed
She had 15.
was a motion as amended. It's- in other
Oh,
words,
okay.
it so I don't think you have to do another motion.
Okay, so then it's good. All right, well, thank you everyone for that lengthy discussion at both meetings on this. It's very helpful. I love hearing everyone's voice included in these decisions. So thank you very much. We have one more resolution, if I could get a motion in a second, authorizing funding for an accountant and an assistant state's attorney to provide accounting, administration, and legal services concerning American Rescue Plan Act funds and corresponding budget adjustments.
Bates moves.
Martin moves, Bates seconds. Any questions or comments on this? Ms. Molina?
Yeah, this one we haven't discussed for 30 minutes yet. So my question would be, the state's attorney that will be assigned to this will specifically and only be doing this, or how will we be timing their?
I'll let Mr. Phillips answer.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the state's attorney that we're asking for is strictly doing this? Are they only assigned to this? And how would we keep track if they're not?
That is the conversation that Ernst & Young and Mr. Sanchez and I had with Vince, the state's attorney's office, and he indicated that they are still having those conversations. And they are going to be speaking to Madam Chair about exactly how the staff will be dedicated.
Mr.
And I would say
The
that
matter
that
narrowly.
Hold on, he's finished.
that same question was posed to Mr. Onsick as well.
So the accountant that we're requesting isn't already an accountant that is already on staff?
No, it is not.
Okay, because they're way understaffed as it is. So this would be a new person who would be specific to this department.
Correct.
But the state's attorney's employee, we don't know whether or not they're going to only do this.
The same applies from what Mr. Onsick told us, that they will be primarily dedicated to ARP, and that element will be paid, but he sees, because the budget is mentioned in his, so that person may have some other tasks that he has not fully vetted.
Mr. Shepro?
Yeah, technically and legally, we can't tell the state's attorney what to do with their assistant. So, I mean, there obviously, like when somebody's assigned to be the county board attorney or whatever, we know what it is, but and legally they can hire an additional assistant and tell them to do anything they want. We can't insist, we can't require that that person be dedicated, but certainly in the past, we worked cooperatively for that function. The accountant, as I understand it, would not be hired by the state's attorney's office, or would it?
No, finance.
It'd be us, so that we can do that.
Yeah.
And I guess my question too is, I would therefore assume that, but maybe wrongly, that if the assistant state's attorney is being brought on board for this, it would be a limited purpose and not a new position to last forever.
Yeah, the person who was assisting Vince before took a job elsewhere. So really, we're filling a gap that we already had a need. Mr. Leonard and then Mr. Martin.
Yes, I just wanted to state that with respect to the total budgetary amount for the attorney, that's a full year's salary, benefits, and everything else. So for them not to be 100% dedicated to this, I think is unfair. You're right, Mr. Shepherd, we can't demand the state's attorney does that, but I think there should be an understanding that this is this person's only objective for the next year.
Ms. Neerman, you have a comment on this topic? Sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
No worries, no worries. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is, we're getting ready for the nice Thanksgiving holiday. The objective would be to have the primary duties of the new assistant state's attorney be through 2026 to assist the ARP committee as well as to work on COVID mitigation efforts, both which are eligible uses under the ARP funds. We have built in and with the help of Mr. Onzik, to utilize funds that were reimbursed through payroll expenses already, so that we would have a little bit more flexibility. We are, most of our attorneys in our division work probably 45 to 50 hours a week. Most recently, since the pandemic has begun, we are now down one person. We are replacing Megan Baxter. We have a new attorney starting in December. This would be an additional position above that to try to get a manageable workload. The ARP and COVID have dramatically increased the responsibilities in the state's attorney's office civil division.
Mr. Martin, sorry.
My comment was just more petty. I know we can't dictate anything. I just don't want to have the person say, I'm sorry, I was caught up in other stuff.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, they got to answer the phones.
No way, Jose.
Yeah, we try not to do that. Obviously, we are in a difficult position over the state's attorney's office. And like I said, most of our attorneys work well over the 35 hour work week that is in our handbook, and that our salaries are based on. And I want to commend everyone in the civil division for doing extraordinarily, just in terms of the quantity of work and the quality of work that they are consistently putting out. It's difficult, and I don't think the 55-hour work week is sustainable. But everyone has really rose to the occasion in this pandemic, in the various emergencies that we have faced over the last 18 months. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Madam Chair for helping put this together. It's been needed, and she came to me and said, I've been working on this and it's coming. So thank you, Madam Chair, for that. Ms. Bates, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, I'm sorry that the state's attorney's office people are working so terribly hard. That doesn't quite answer our question that will this person be dedicated?
Yes, they will be dedicated to working on ARP and COVID mitigation.
Okay.
They might be doing additional duties as well if they have time. But primarily the objective will be to have them assist the health department in COVID mitigation, the county in various COVID mitigation, and ARP. There's going to be a lot of additional work with all the various projects, drafting the resolutions, reviewing projects for eligibility from the legal perspective, and for reviewing all of the various contracts that are going to go along with all of the various ARP projects.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Michelle.
Absolutely, anytime.
Any other questions or comments on this before Mr. Martin starts digging into his birthday presents?
I have to go make a green bean casserole. Let's wrap this up.
Bring that casserole. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ross, Gums.
Oh,
She's
she
up.
just had to leave. She just had to leave.
Thank you. Kenyon,
Yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman,
Strathman, yes.
Tepi,
Tepe, yes.
and Sanchez.
Sanchez, yes. Okay, we got through that. It's about time. We have no old business.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Brown.
One comment I'd like to make, or maybe one request. It was asked earlier what the timeline looks like and when the porthole is going to be open, and the date of December 8th was mentioned. Our next meeting is on December 8th. So I would ask that on December 8th, when we have our next meeting, there'd be a very defined timeline. Is the porthole open on that day? When is it going to be closed? When is it going to be reviewed by? In other words, when these applicants can expect to get a check?
Yeah.
To give us a full timeline on when and how this is going to happen.
Yeah, that's being worked on.
May I speak to that
Yes,
more
Mr.
clearly?
Phillips.
To clarify that, Mr. Brown, is the portal will be available and built and ready to launch on December 8th. I should clarify, we are going to present that to you on December 8th. It will be able to be opened immediately.
Okay, so assuming we are acceptable to that,
Correct.
which I don't know why we wouldn't be if our consultant says it is what it is.
I think because of due diligence, because it's going to be tied directly to Treasury verbiage, and there are going to be thresholds there that tie directly to our compliance and reporting throughout the life of the contract, or throughout the life of the program, that it is an executive level decision that must be looked at it collective.
Okay. I think you understand my point. My point is the applicants need to know timelines.
I understand.
Thank you. And so do we, yeah.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We have no need for executive session, no old business. I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Kenyon moves.
Not you, Bates. Bates, you gotta come